I'm a 20-year-old Kiwi Indian whose family has lived right on the edge of moments of terror. My dad flew the day 9/11 happened, an event that would turn many of my mom's side of the family, who wore turbans and had beards, into collateral victims of hate violence. My sister escaped the Bolivian civil strikes and the Paris attacks. My grandmother crossed from the area that's now known as Pakistan into Punjab, and amongst the partition's bloody violence. And my uncle fled after being tied up and left in the middle of the fields in rural India at night. Growing up with this sort of history of violence, as well as paradoxically in one of the most peaceful countries on this planet, I realized there was a secondary narrative that was floating around. And that was the rhetoric of the war on terror, which I realized was in itself a war. Many of us arm ourselves up to go to battle every day, and many of us carry that us versus them mentality straight into our NGOs, activism, and work, working to fight against other countries, other corporations, paradoxically fighting for peace. I also realized that a moment of conflict could be turned into an opportunity for connection, and in doing so, we could rehumanize the other side and make issues more personal. Last year, I graduated from United World College. As many of you know, it is an educational movement founded after World War II by Kurt Hahn, who wanted to make education a force to unite people, nations, and culture for peace and sustainable future. For me, I think going to UWC made every conflict at almost every scale somehow personal. The struggle for national self-determination was my Kurdish floormate, who refused to be recognized by the Iraqi designation on her door. The bombings in Turkey was a classmate walking into our math session one morning, hoping that his father was okay. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict were two students, Ido and Mohaned, who eventually ended up reconciling their differences, and they went on to found the International Peace Conference, which I later joined in organizing. This session is about the future of peace. It's about questioning the existing narratives, and it's about looking at the underlying forces that create conditions for conflict and some of the ethical dilemmas of war. It's about the way in which we can use both technology and poetry to have an impact. So we first start off in Myanmar by looking at the ways in which social engineering impacts democracy and the power of connecting children to free education. We then turn to Sudan and movement making, peace talks, peace walks, and how to use storytelling for advocacy. And lastly, we talk a little bit about morality and philosophy. So with that being said, I would love to welcome our first speaker, James Song, recently named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum and a Fulbright Scholar. He is the founder and CEO of ExsulCoin, a blockchain technology startup focused on delivering high-quality education to disadvantaged communities and refugees. He is also the creator of Exsul, an AI-driven app that also delivers free education. Please welcome James to the stage.
Grab a seat and sit with you. I don't think I'm going to present anything to you today, but really have a real honest chat with you, and I think that's really important in a 2018 world. I think we're living in a period of time that's defined by irrationality, and as we transition and integrate more with technology all around us, I think it's important to understand that technology serves humans. The reason why a chair has value to us is because it has values to humans. If we were turtles, these chairs would have no value to us. So likewise, things that we are trying to automate, things we are building with technology, they serve humans. So it's important to find what it is that is human in the things we're doing, and it's a good way to align end user interests with things that you're building. So I work in Myanmar. I have no Burmese heritage. I got there in 2012, just when it opened up. I had been supporting an orphanage there for many years. I still do. And I went there as an investor. I was seeing a lot of deals that were very interesting at the time because it was a new democracy or a new country emerging out of almost 50 years of a military rule. So it was isolated from the rest of the world, and it missed the whole internet thing, MTV, all of that. missed it entirely, and then it was just like a new country. And I had realized over the years, I had been supporting this orphanage, maybe like $5 or $10 a month, that kind of thing. I sent a few $100s at a couple of instances to send some kids to university, one to become a doctor, a couple to become engineers. And when I visited, I realized they had all left the country to work in Dubai, because in Dubai, if you sweep floors in a shopping mall, that pays about $600 a month. But at the time, if you spoke perfect English and had a university education in Myanmar, and you got a job working at a hotel, for instance, that paid about $75 a month. So the economics made a lot of sense for them to leave. And I thought that was very wrong, that someone who has no connection to Myanmar would come and plunder all these deals, and these children would be excluded. It didn't matter who they know or what they did in their life. It's just they were in the wrong circle of people. So I spent the next few years investing in different projects in Myanmar, trying to open up opportunity. That didn't work out well. It's the way it works in Southeast Asia is there's a lot of crony capitalism. So if you don't do the right things and you don't know the right people, deals don't work out. And within crony capitalism, you have a lot of people who are very wealthy, and they talk to each other about things that wealthy people talk to each other about, like business class travel, good champagne, things like that. And that doesn't translate very well to a country where a typical meal costs about 75 US cents. So you start building things like the last investment they asked me to look at was the Hard Rock Cafe in Yangon. And I told them I didn't come here to sell $20 hamburgers to people, and it was just a big disconnect. And what I had wanted to invest in the entire time I was there was education. I thought there was a big white space there, only because as a country, it has no real formal education system. And I had a chance to look at education and investing in education with two particular unique perspectives. One, as someone who could build from scratch. It's not like there was a legacy system that had to carry over and I had to build on top of it. It was a blank check, could do whatever you want. Secondly, I cared about these kids, and it's a big problem with groups like this is that we come and then we feed into certain ideologies, and then we kind of root for these ideologies, and it becomes a kind of approval-seeking process, which I really dislike. So I could tell you, for instance, one of the kids at the orphanage, she went to university, did very well, and then we put her in culinary school because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to make fancy food, and she went to culinary school, did very well, can make beautiful food that tastes very good. And if I ended the story there, you could say that that's some kind of social impact success, but it wouldn't be honest. What really happened, and this is recent. This is maybe in January. She graduated and started looking for work, and the work available to her because of what you can earn in Myanmar, and foreigners coming in as aid workers and looking to hire household help. She was offered about $150 a month to work as essentially a maid for a family who could cook really good food all the time, only because when you come in as a foreign aid worker, you have quite a large budget and you can afford to do that. And what happens on the other side of it, it's kind of a modern-day version of slavery, because it's very difficult to save money at that point and do things and emerge out of poverty when you devote so much time to your work and it doesn't produce a lot of value at the end of the day. So that's really problematic to me, and the reason why I choose to have a very honest talk about things that are very unpopular is because education has to work for me. You know, like, I'm invested in this. If it doesn't work, I can't sell it. You know, it's not something I promote. It's not something I do. It's just my perspective on things, on what works and what doesn't work. What works, no, let me talk about what doesn't work. I don't think building schools works. I think it's great to talk about, very sexy. You have to build these schools, they're expensive. Then you have to staff them with teachers, which teachers I don't believe they're a worthy investment in generally. That's my perspective, only because teachers start at a negative, meaning teacher's a person. So they could have a terrible home life and then bring that in the classroom and take it out on your children. And that's why my approach in Myanmar is technology first. Myanmar as a country is smartphone first because they hopped over a lot of internet. So Facebook is a very big thing in Myanmar, and Facebook targeting allows us to deliver education optimized to an individual. So our approach to education, me and my team, is to optimize to each individual. And I think of the 2 points that I'd like to get across today is that education has to be a pathway, not a monolith, not something we worship. It has to be a pathway to get someone where they want to go. And hence, I think it's important to teach like a basic knowledge transfer, how to multiply fractions and things like that, but also how to think, how to learn, how to analyze things. I think those things are very important. Whether that could be done outside of school, these are things we're experimenting with. I know a lot of people are working on education. I think that's very important. I think vaporware is very important, that a lot of people experiment and make a lot of mistakes, and then at the end of it, we're going to figure out things that work really well. And I think we are in a period of time where we could really innovate on teaching, which hasn't really seen much innovation in the last couple of years, only because of a couple of things. First is cheap computing power. AI has been around for several decades, but it hasn't been accessible to everyone until just about now, just because computing power is so cheap. And another thing that's really interesting today is that everyone has a smartphone. You could buy an Android-powered smartphone with 2 cameras. The forward-facing camera is really important. We use that to track engagement, to track where your eyes are, so we can authenticate whether someone is watching a course or if they just press play and put the phone down. But you're able to collect individualized data to each person and then deliver content based on that person's habit. And then on top of that, you can hack engagement. For instance, we use notifications the same way Facebook uses notifications. We also experiment with other things like subliminal messaging in videos and other things that the data shows us. So for instance, if you have to take a physics course in university, that might be twice a week in the mornings, but maybe for you specifically, it's better if you have 12 10-minute sessions in the evenings, maybe twice a week instead of that one long session in the morning. So figuring about individuals was really important to us to kind of define and then deliver that way. So I work with a lot of refugees as well. Refugees as a population don't get to go to schools, so we can experiment with them and deliver education with them, and then we don't have any confounding factors regarding our technology, whether our technology is working or not. And what we're working on with them is because what we see, instead of building traditional structures like a university in Yangon, for instance, it's hard to get equivalence, meaning if you graduate someone from Yangon and they have a full course curriculum and they do very well, it's not necessarily equivalent in an employer's mind to someone who graduates from New York University, where they have a US degree. So what we do instead is open source education and then open source verification, and then we store academic achievement on the Ethereum blockchain so you could be publicly audited. And which brings me to the topic of peace. Education is a force multiplier, and that's why it's important in a conflict region like Myanmar. So regions where there's low education has a 50% more chance of seeing conflict than other regions. And what's important for people is that they're able to reason with each other without having it devolve into violence, and able to kind of step outside of themselves and understand the perspective that other people have. That's incredibly important, especially to disadvantaged and marginalized communities who can't who can't achieve upward mobilization, because that makes them frustrated, and when you get frustrated, you get angry. When you get angry enough, you become violent. So solving for those problems is incredibly important in Myanmar. And if I had to convey one more point that we see out of our data coming out of Myanmar, is that social engineering is becoming an incredibly important topic of conversation that we don't talk enough about. Myanmar being a Facebook-first country, particularly susceptible to social engineering only because of the data being collected from your smartphone about your use and who you are and what kinds of content you consume, and that Facebook can separate and categorize that data about you, and then messages can be targeted to you specifically. So when we want to send out a piece of content, it costs us about ½ US cent to make sure it gets to your phone. So to give you an example, if I wanted to engineer something around this group of people, I wouldn't necessarily physically come here anymore. I would target this particular event, FutureTalks as a keyword, or this particular area, and then I would send messaging according to your political beliefs, and political beliefs don't have to be defined as left or right. Instead, it could be things related to social issues. So people on the left, for instance, they just tend to like going outdoors more. That's what our data says. So we could target and make videos about being outdoors, and that would naturally be more left-leaning than right. So you could target different groups of people that way and start segmenting. And the thing about global platforms now, which is important to know, is that you can operate, or you could send this messaging across jurisdictions. And so some things that are heavily regulated in some areas aren't regulated at all at other areas. So for instance, in Myanmar, there's very light regulation, and in the US, there's heavy regulation. However, there is a white space of unknown unknowns, things that people don't know. So for instance, people are not aware of subliminal messaging in social media videos. I think it'll become a topic of conversation over the next couple of years. Those are the things we're experimenting with to hack engagement, and we're sure people are using those things for other purposes. And creating what we call nano-targeting, meaning it used to be that in terms of politics, that you would say things a particular way in one region and then say things another way in another region, but now you could deliver messaging to each individual person, and it's not region specific because the platform figures it out for you. So these are important issues we see arising out of our user data, and I think these are things that we'll be forced to think about over the next coming 5 or 10 years at the very least. And I am just really grateful that I had a chance to share that with you today, because we are usually just in a corner of the world where a lot of people aren't paying a lot of attention, and then where we're doing a lot of this work in isolation. But thank you.
And we have time for a few more questions from the audience. So if anyone wants to ask James anything about his blockchain technology or social engineering attacks in Myanmar, now's the time.
Can you hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because you talk a lot about tailoring content towards the particular student, right? Mm-hmm. So one of my immediate thoughts is the creation of echo chambers that constantly get the content that is specific to you. But for me, I find it really important that you're also exposed to counter beliefs to sort of what you you think, like your view? So do you take that into consideration?
When I was first asked to do this, they wanted me to focus on peace, and I had a particular topic I wanted to speak about, and the issue with social engineering and what I want to concentrate on is I believe democracy is in its demise, only because it's so easy to target individuals and to influence them over time, and people are very unaware of it. So these echo chambers can be used in that way, but in addition to that, it's very hard. Engineering people is very easy, and then when they're able to target you specifically, it becomes even easier and actually quite cheap. I think predictive analytics actually makes that easier for people to use, and then when more people figure that out, it'll become worse and worse. So the solution to it, and it's not very easy to accept, is you also have to social engineer your own views at other people. Like, you literally have to fight back.
You talked about Myanmar as a place with little regulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also talked about the front camera of your cell phone, just like when it's doing stuff about these kids going to your university. How do you deal with privacy? You know, all this, like, gather information about the students, their habits, their patterns.
We don't gather that much information.
You give it to Facebook, though?
Facebook collects their own data, and then we don't run any of our things through Facebook. We run it through our own app, and then it gets stored on the Ethereum blockchain, which is public, and then you can audit every part of it, and that's what we wanted. Privacy, if I were to be completely honest with you, it's over. People will know more and more about you as time goes on. It's a non-issue, just because I could tell you things aren't private. More data about you is being collected than you're aware of, but you're going to keep using Facebook and Instagram. So.
All right. That's all the time we have for questions, but if you have, I saw a few other hands up. If you have more questions for James, feel free to come up to him afterwards. I'm sure he'd love to have a chat. So once again, thank you, James.
Thanks.